What's up, everyone? John Steele here with Team Steele San Diego Homes, coming to you for another episode of Get Real with Real Estate. I believe this is episode 48. And today I'm going to be talking about something new that's still being figured out, and it's opportunity zones. And this is something you may have heard about, but basically it's a new thing that's coming out, and a lot of investors have their eyes on it because it's a cool new program that could be a good alternative for something that's very popular in the real estate and investing world, which is 1031 exchanges. So real quick, for anyone who doesn't know, 1031 tax-deferred exchanges is an opportunity for investors specifically to essentially like reinvest their earnings, their capital gains from what they've earned on a property into a new property. So a really like simple way of putting it that I always like to tell people is it's almost like rolling over your 401k, but in a real estate sense. So a 1031 exchange would be like if you had a rental property and let's say you bought it for $400,000, and let's say now 10 years later that property is worth $700,000. There's a $300,000 capital gains there that the state, the government, they're going to want to tax that. So one of the things that investors do is a 1031 exchange to avoid that capital gain. So what they'll do is they'll take that $700,000 property, they'll sell it, and they reinvest the whole $700,000 into another property. And it has to be an investment property to investment property. This cannot be done with you living your personal residence. So it has to be some sort of income producing investment type asset. The opportunity zones is interesting because like I said earlier, it's a little bit of a new alternative to that. So with the 1031 exchanges, it was a very common strategy for a lot of investors to do what's called swap until you drop. Just keep 1031 exchanging after 1031 exchanging after 1031 exchanging until you pass away, and your portfolio essentially passes on to your heirs, and they don't pay that capital gains. So if you started out young, maybe bought some little rental back in the day for 50 grand, then now that became worth 150. Maybe you bought a 2-unit for 150. And then a couple years later, you reinvested that. Now it's maybe worth 500. You reinvest that. Now you got like a 16-unit apartment complex. Essentially, you see how it goes. It can just keep going and going and going until you snowball and have this big portfolio. If you keep doing 1031 exchanges, though, you never pay capital gains on that until you essentially cash out. So if you don't end up reinvesting the proceeds. So I know that was a lot about 1031 exchanges. Let me get to opportunity zones because that's going to be the focus of my video today. So opportunity zones are this new thing that's coming out where there are certain zones designated around the country that are considered opportunity zones. And these are typically areas that, maybe need some love. They're typically areas that investors may not look to get into if it wasn't for these tax benefits. So really what it is it's not only encouraging investors to develop these areas and kind of bring them up to speed, but it's also giving them tax incentives for that. So this opportunity zone, back to capital gains, let's say you have this property or investment, because actually opportunity zone, another unique thing is it's not exclusive to real estate. A 1031 exchange only can be done with real estate. Opportunity zone can actually be done with anything that has capital gains. So stocks, bonds, any sort of investment you made that has capital gains, you can potentially use these opportunity zones. And what it is let's take that same house that we mentioned earlier, right? You bought it for $400,000, now it's worth $700,000. You've got some capital gains, $300,000 to keep in mind. If you don't want to reinvest that into real estate and you maybe want to move it into something else, there is an option for you, and it's the opportunity zone. So you can take, if you sell and you want to use the opportunity zone, you take the capital gains portion. So unlike the 1031 where you have to reinvest the whole portion, an opportunity zone, you only invest the capital gains portion. So let's say you had that $400,000 house and now it's worth $700,000 and you sell it. You're looking at that $300,000 chunk. And what you can do with that is you can take it and put it into an opportunity zone fund. And what it does is basically they use that to then reinvest or redevelop and bring up these opportunity zones. But what's really interesting about it is you can actually reduce your tax liability on it. So with a 1031 exchange, you never reduce the tax liability, you just defer it. You just keep pushing it off, pushing it off, pushing it off. If you do end up selling though, you do have to come back and pay all that stuff. So that's why people say swap, swap, swap until you drop. Essentially wait till you die so you don't have that. But like I said, if you do end up selling, you'll have to cover that tax basis. Now, in the opportunity zone, as I mentioned, there's a way to reduce that tax liability. So there's two things. So if you put your money in that opportunity zone for, I'm looking at my notes here, and it stays in there for at least 5 years, you get a 10% reduction in the capital gains tax. If you keep that same amount of money in there for 7 years, you get a 15% reduction. And then here's the big kicker. If you keep it in there for at least 10 years, any capital gains realized upon the sale of the investment is tax-free. So that's huge. So it's a little bit complicated, and again, I'm not 100% confident on this myself, as they're just starting to figure it all out. But basically, it's an opportunity for if you want to have an exit strategy, get out of your real estate investment, or really any other investment. Like I said, it's not specific to real estate. You can potentially invest in one of these zones and not only, shelter some of that from the tax, but actually reduce some of that capital gains tax liability. It's huge, could be huge. I know that there are a lot of big time investors with, lots of cash that I'm sure are going to be looking at this very closely to see, how it plays out, how they can use it to their advantage. Because this is a very new thing, and it is, like I said, 10, 15% or more reduction in that capital gains. That's a massive, massive amount when you're thinking that some of these investors, you could be to the tune of hundreds of millions. So it's really interesting. I'm looking at Ben, and Ben is an accountant, so I'm curious what he has to say on it. So I'm curious what he says. So all this stuff is new, very interesting stuff that's happening. Feel free to reach out if you have any questions. Like I said, I'm just learning all this stuff now, but it is very interesting. And I know 1031 exchanges, there's something that we've done in the past for clients. It's something that we're probably going to look to in the future with some of our investments. But I do know that this opportunity zone is interesting. Like, it's piquing my interest. Should we ever decide to kind of move away from real estate, or get into bigger things, it's kind of just another creative way to, reduce your tax liability, and get creative with, jumping through those different loopholes that are available. We always say it's work smarter, not harder. Find ways to, keep the money that you make. This is a really interesting opportunity. Would love to know if anybody else has had their eye on opportunity zones, what they're thinking about it, how they're thinking about utilizing it. Really cool opportunity. Would love to hear what you guys think. But thanks for tuning in for another episode of Get Real with Real Estate. Hope you guys have an amazing week.